Good evening and thanks for joining us on our news analysis program, Talking Point. So it was just last Friday that the nation marked Founders Day, which was instituted in 2009 by the late President Atta Mills in honor of Ghana's first president, Osajifo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, one of the most revered black freedom fighters in the world. The late President Atta Mills declared 21st of September a statutory public holiday to immortalize the country's founder, Dr. Nkrumah, whose birthday falls on that day. Dr. Nkrumah was the motivating force behind the independence of Ghana from British rule in 1957 and became the first president of the country. In marking the 103rd birthday of the great man Kwame Nkrumah, Talking Point today discusses who the man Kwame Nkrumah was, and we will also look at some of his policies, particularly his 7-year development plan, and why Ghana since then has not had any national development plan. I'm Conrad Kakraba, sitting in for your regular host, Abdul Hayi Moomen. And the panelists for today's program, from my immediate left, Mr. W.T. Ward-Brew. He's an alumnus. T.N. Ward-Brew. He is an alumnus of the Kwame Nkrumah Ideological Institute. And then next to him, Mr. Bernard Mona. He's a member of the Founders Day Planning Committee. And just next to him is Mr. Kosi Dede. He is the Director of Party Education of the CPP. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Now, so if I may start with you, Mr. Ward-Brew, who was the man Kwame Nkrumah?
Well, it's very difficult to respond to what the question you're asking because Kwame Nkrumah was larger than life. He had grown to become such a huge personality that some see him as the greatest African of all time. Why was it so? Because his life reflected many of the contributions he made both to the African cause, to Ghanaian, to the international order, everywhere. And with every level he rose to, he carried Ghana along with him. See, to that extent, I remember in 1972 in Thailand, a place they call Chiang Mai, when I was there, and the person asked me, when university professor, and I say Ghana, he says, oh, Kwame Nkrumah, his name had become synonymous with Ghana. And therefore, to depict Kwame Nkrumah and portray him, I would say he was, within the 62 years life he led, he was so charismatic, energetic, hardworking. In fact, somebody who even described him, he says he went to work at 6 a.m., left at about 9 p.m. Voracious reader. So as for Kwame Nkrumah, I will assess him by the challenges he actually encountered.
Right.
Like the bomb throwings, like the disturbance, political, and then also, I also used the yardstick of the UGCC when they invited him. Yeah. They saw something in him, and that thing which they saw in him historically was proved right. And that has continued to be a very insightful invitation, which was justified by historical developments.
Yeah. Thanks. Now, Bernard, what are some of the things or some of the failings of Dr. Kwame Nkrumah that have cast him in bad light to some people?
Well, let me start probably on the note that Comrade Ward-Brew left. That if you ask me to describe the character Nkrumah, I'll tell you he was larger than life. He lived several years beyond his time. He thought of the world, not just for his generation, but for generations yet unborn. A man from a simple village, a poor person, who struggled to rise to the topmost in his political life, and indeed inspired a whole generation. I think he left the greatest legacy, not by the physical achievements that we count every day, but for the intellectual depth that he has left on this earth. I'm not sure that there is anywhere in this world where you have sitting president also writing down but he was a president and could still write. If you ask me of the failures of Nkrumah, it will be very difficult to point out. But just to say that one of the weaknesses of Nkrumah is that even where he was told and was aware of his greatest enemies, he still treated them with smooth hands. You understand? In other places, they will tell you that Nkrumah should not have treated those who opposed him, those who wanted him dead, those who wanted to do everything to undermine his administration. Yeah. And yet he had the heart to tolerate them. And some of us consider it as a failure. Indeed, Nyerere and many others pointed out that it was the failings of Nkrumah and that his departure from the political scene of Ghana was because he tolerated so many things that he knew were harming his administration. Yeah. That not said, Nkrumah, like any one of us, is a human being. And so there were some aspects of his life that you will not approve of. But if you put those aspects with the circumstances that he responded to, I'm sure that every normal human being would have responded to them with the most vicious and probably more heavy-handedness than Nkrumah did. So it's difficult for me, but just to admit that he was a human being, he might have committed some mistakes in the end. Many have criticized him that whilst he was champion in continental gold, for instance, he achieved the independence of Ghana and single-handedly went in to ensure that Ghana had a currency instead of looking for an African currency from the outset. But why? There are reasons for which he started that agenda. And so that is considered as a failure on his part, but I can tell you that Nkrumah has no equal in the political affairs of Africa.
Right. Now, Mr. Dede, we always hear that Nkrumah never dies, and that has run through the celebrations that we just had. What really is that belief hinged on?
Well, there's an Akan proverb that says, you bury a person, but you don't bury the person's tank. Luckily, apart from what he said, he did a lot of writing. And in contemporary Ghana and Africa, for that matter, many of us go back and read his books and say, hey, where did the ideas come from? The ideas are still relevant. And for me, that is where a lot of people tend to say Nkrumah never dies. Yeah. And therefore, it's important that those of us who have heard this saying go back and read some of the things that he did say, or some of the things he wrote about. Africa Must Unite, a very good book. Yeah. Why must Africa unite? Again, the reasons are not too far to find. He says that Africa, the unity of Africa is not an end in itself. It is a means to an end. In that, as of today, we sit here in Africa, we do not control the price of cocoa. We do not control the price of any raw material that goes out of Africa. Why should it be so? And yet, if we want to buy items of technology, nobody in Africa has a hand in determining the price of, say, a manufactured vehicle in the US or the UK or China for that matter. And yet, these other countries sit down and determine for us the price of cocoa, gold, and other raw materials that are exported from Africa. For him, therefore, the project of African unity was one of a means to an end, for us to attain the kind of economic independence that we needed to ensure that the benefits of the products of this land will come to the people of Africa. Right. So when people speak of African unity largely, many see it as some just economic interaction among African countries, but it is rather a means to an end towards the real independence that we sought for, not just political but economic independence.
That's right. Now,
but on the issue of the failure, the failure thing, you see, it depends on which angle you are looking at it. You see how you define failure. PDA, for instance, was a British legislation in India. In India, they used it successfully. You see, in Ghana, PDA was also applied at a time when I couldn't see whichever way Nkrumah could have handled the uprisings that he encountered. Yeah. Especially the violence, the bomb throwings and all that. He was a human being. In Hitler, in his life, when his generals made an attempt to eliminate Hitler, and they were putting the bomb in a briefcase, and it missed him. When he got up, he says, kill everybody. He didn't spare anybody. You see what I'm saying? And that was Hitler. But Nkrumah wouldn't do that. You know, he started as a theologian or so forth. And that thing could be seen in him. Look, there was somebody, Justice A&E Emerson, a Supreme Court judge. He says that when he was the Attorney General's prosecution, when you go and give Kwame Nkrumah anything to sign, append his signature to executions, he will never do it.
Why?
Why? You know, because the way he was, his human nature, if you get closer to him, you know, here is a man who was fighting to liberate people, fighting to assist the freedom of others. How could he be interested in, you know? But let it also be stated that usually those who criticize him, if you use their own lives as yardstick and the difficulties they themselves make, you could see they themselves, they don't come anywhere. And that if they had passed through what he passed, they could have been worse.
Okay, now I'm quoting from one of Nkrumah's books, Conscientism, and that's on page 102. It says, it is far easier for the proverbial camel to pass through the needle's eye than for an erstwhile colonial administration to give sound and honest counsel of a political nature to its liberated territory. Therefore, to allow a foreign country, especially one which is loaded with economic interests in our continent, to tell us what political courses to follow is indeed for us to hand back our independence to the oppressor on a silver platter. Now, looking at the whole discussion we are having and putting Nkrumah in the context of African unity and then also liberating the African, what would you say about that, Mr. Let's go to Bernard.
Well, I think that, as I stated in my opening remarks, Nkrumah was larger than life. He lived several years beyond his generation. And therefore, this quotation epitomizes my initial call that, look, this is a man who could foresee that in our fragmentation, in what I describe as village heroism that we call countries, we cannot be able to stand the might of any country in Europe. And therefore, it was important for us to harness our resources for the collective good of our people. One of such resources is the Ingab River in the Democratic Republic of Congo that is capable of generating the hydro energy for the whole of the continent and still have surplus. How come that Africa has not been able to pool resources so that we'll be able to develop that into an hydro plant so that we'll be able to get the energy requirements for? And see what is happening in the Democratic Republic of Congo. You think that it is an African interest or European interest. Why is it that that part of the world is not allowed its stay since the demise or the murder, I call it the murder of Patrice Lumumba? Clearly, it is because if we allow the resources of that part of our continent to be harnessed, our continent will become richer. Take the whole of the Sudan region and see how much land, how much resources we have in that area. But why? In our disunity, in our fragmentation, we are unable to pool our resources so that we'll be able to leap onto the next stage of economic advancement. And therefore, Nkrumah was right. No country should think that by the givings of other countries will be able to advance the cause of our individual countries. Ghana cannot develop because the European Union will not permit you to develop. Today, see the impediments they are putting on our way. They talked about economic partnership agreement. They are compelling African countries so they can append to the economic partnership agreement. You know the reason? The reason is not because they want to see our salvation. The reason is that when we append, we will now become more slaves to them. We will export to them things that they will later turn out to say, look, we have not met European or American standards, and they will export to us things at almost zero duties. That look, if I don't toe the line of the so-called imperialists, my government will be made unpopular because money will be inundated in the hands of the opposition so that they will be able to undermine your forward march. And why? The opposition has become a gullible source of influence. Easily they want to get into power at all costs, and because of that, we rely on all sorts of money. And that is the reason for which some of these unpopular statements are made. All right.
Now, Mr. Tete, what exactly does Ghana need in order to have a very comprehensive national agenda like what Kwame Nkrumah actually had?
Well, I think there needs to be a lot of broad consultation, because over the last years we've seen plans stretch from Ghana development plan for 2020, 2015, then another government comes and changes. I think that the partisanship is really terrible, and we need to have some level of genuine and broad consultation and allow the National Development Planning Commission to work effectively. One, there are certain things that are universal to all of us and common to all of us. We want certain infrastructure, education, roads, how we develop in terms of networks and town planning, very important. Ghana, as it is, landmass. For anyone who wants to build a house, you have a plot of land. You decide where your bedroom is going to be, where your kitchen is going to be, where your hall is going to be. Now, as it is, if you look at Accra, Accra is spread wide. Without proper town and country planning, Accra is not going to be manageable in the next 50 years. We can't. Because we have no proper enforcement of zoning laws. And these are basic things that we can all agree to in terms of a national plan. And say that this piece of land here is meant to be used for schools. End of story. Whether government owns it or not, that piece of land is meant for a school. And that is where I find it very sad when politicians come out and say, oh, because we don't own land, we cannot control the land development. It is not true. Government can control the use of land by simply saying this land can only be used for this, whether it is owned by the chief or a private person. End of story. And that is what we need to begin to do.
Okay.
Because if you look at from here all the way to Akosombo, see what's happening on the road. We are selling all these lands and anybody is just buying land and putting up a house anywhere. Is that how we want our country to be developed? Clearly, without proper town and country planning, this country is going to be very difficult to manage.
Great.
In terms of traffic, in terms of services, electricity, water, telephony. Look, the science is there. If you do not develop vertically and plan your cities properly, it's going to be the cost of electricity will continue to increase. The cost of distributing water will continue to increase. Your losses will increase. So the science is there.
Yeah.
It is for us to take some of these issues and put it into a national plan and say, this is the way it's going to be.
So now there is no argument as to whether we need a national development plan or not. No. And we actually have a National Development Planning Commission. Now, who really should initiate this kind of national development plan, for the country?
To make it relevant,
yeah,
you need a new political order.
How do we get that?
See, the existing political system is such that if you give any party 4 years, it could not eliminate the problems this country is facing. And
it's too short?
It's too short. And within a short time, you find the people in arms. You find the political opinion weighing against the government of the day, and it has to think about its survivor. You see, that kind of system, I'm saying, it's not a good thing at all. You see, but aside of that, let me also say that it is important also that we recognize that as far as the party system is concerned, it's like a huge dragon that feeds on massive resources in order for it to be effective, operational. And that massive resources can only come from public patronage. You see, because without that, where are you going to get that money from? So you will see that the party system becomes the greatest instigator of corruption.
Okay.
You see, so that kind of situation which we are facing now, until we do something about it, we always find out that party faithfuls all begin to rely on what they can get from the ruling party. So in the long run, you will see that the ruling party attracts to itself so much hatred, criticism. People will be blaming it for everything when it might not even be responsible. Except that by the very nature of the system which you are having, for its survival, it has to resort to so many schemes. That's why I'm saying that as for the development vision, it's there. We cannot deny it.
All right.
But it is a political order
that needs to be
should
changed.
go along with it.
Okay, great.
Because there's too much rigidity in our system, the one we have. When people have positions, they don't want to change it. So all the campaigns, they don't amount to anything.
All right. Bernard, you're a politician too. Now, so I still came back to the question of the National Development Planning Commission. Do you think they should initiate this national agenda and then, like they said, we should have broad consultation coming from them, for example, and not political parties?
I agree with them, and that's why I agree absolutely with the National Constitutional Review Commission when they said that we should have a national development agenda that all political parties should draw in. My sadness, however, is that government white paper opposed this particular laudable position. And I was hoping that the National Development Planning Commission will be expanded so that at the end of the day, we will have political party representations so that we will all have a collective ownership in the process. But I also agree with Comrade Ward Bruin and said that, look, the political order has to change. Not change.
How would you like to see it?
Not change, yes, in terms of the political parties, but also that, look, this issue of winner takes it all, loser takes zero, is not helping the cause of our nation, because many are those bright ideas, and because their political party failed to win the elections, their services are not needed in the running of the affairs of this nation. Why? You see, for instance, and I keep citing 2008, Nana Addo lost by the teeth of a camel. You understand? And what it means is that his contribution to national endeavors is relegated to only opposition politics and nothing else. He has not got any input in governance in this nation apart from just doing criticism of a government and its policies. Look, there are many more intelligent people in this nation with all manner of expertise, and we cannot all belong to the same political party. But if we have what we call winner takes some, loser takes some, it is important at that stage that we will have a blend of ideas, a fusion of thoughts that will be able to lift this nation to the next level.
Right. So that's how it's got to be. It's been Talking Point, and we've been talking about the Founders' Day celebrations and then also the significance of the Kwame Nkrumah National Development Agenda that he had, and whether Ghana needs a national development agenda very critically. My panelists have been Mr. T.N. Ward-Brew. He's an alumnus of the Kwame Nkrumah Ideological Institute, and next to him, Mr. Bernard Mona. He's a member of the Founders Day Planning Committee, and also Mr. Kosi Dede. He's the Director of Party Education of the CPP. I'm Conrad Kakraba. Thank you so much for sitting in with us. Have a good night.